So hello everybody, this is Bhante Joe here, and I'm just here at the Pilikutua/Yongamula forest and thought to record a short ovada for the internet. So I thought that could start with just a little meditation, so it can lean forward a bit and arch the spine. And look about 3 feet in front, and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in, and know when it's going out. If one breathes in a long breath, can just know, I'm breathing in a long breath. And if one breathes in a short breath, can just know, I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus on the breath at the tip of the nose. And when focusing on the breath at the tip of the nose, it can be good to make mindfulness as continuous as possible, being aware all the way through the in-breath, as the in-breath turns to the out-breath. All the way through the out-breath. And as the out-breath turns back to the in-breath again. Trying to keep mindfulness as continuous as possible. And can just pose the question in the mind, what would be a really comfortable way to breathe right now? And then one can just let one's body respond on its own. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. can open our eyes and do a short ovada for the internet. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So hope that everybody is keeping well wherever it might be. And I'm back here at the Pilikutua forest and just going through the process of asking permission to build a kuti in the forest. So yesterday we met with this district officer, and he's going to come and take a look at the site tomorrow. So we don't know, we'll see how things go. All these things are always a little bit uncertain. But it's been an interesting process to go through this process of trying to apply to build a kuti in the forest, because there's these different routes at which one can actually branch off and just stop the process if one wants to try to take a shortcut. Now, monks have these rules where we can't actually take anything that belongs to another person without permission. If we take things over a certain value, then it's what's called a parajika offense, or an offense involving defeat. And if we fall into an offense like that, then we're no longer monks from the minute we commit that offense. So usually monks are very, very careful about taking things that don't belong to them. So in this case, there's these various areas where you could, if you get just the permission of one of the local officials, sometimes you can just start building. And there's more gray areas in Sri Lankan legal practice than in the West. There's more, I guess one might say, like a flexibility or so. Officials seem to have a little bit more ability to make judgment calls, and there's a kind of gray areas in certain things where one can either start the process or go on to look more carefully. And so oftentimes people will just stop with what they call the Grama Sevaka, the village headman. They'll just ask permission from him and they'll start to build a kuti, especially if they're lay people. Some lay people, actually, there's some lay people living in the forest. Sometimes lay people will come and build something in the forest, and then they'll just kind of build it, and that's a little bit of a gray area. But one of these things is that in this process, if one kind of goes through as a monk and takes all the reasonable steps, the reasonable precautions, until one is beyond a reasonable doubt that everything is okay, and then one has done things in line with the proper procedures and asked all the proper owners, then one can live in that kuti without doubt. So this is something that's a kind of balancing act. In the monastic life and also in the lay life, we have rules and precepts. We have rules and regulations that either we set for ourselves, are set by people like our society, or most importantly are the ones that are set by the Buddha, the 5 precepts, the 8 precepts. And these are the precepts for lay people, and for monastics, the 10 precepts and the 227 precepts. So whenever there's a rule, there's always a certain difficulty in applying that rule to every circumstance, in every situation, to writing a rule in such a way that it's going to completely apply exactly in every case. There's always a little area where one has to make a judgment call, where one has to decide, is this with the gray part of this rule, or is this with the white part of this rule? Does this fall into the white side, or does this gray area fall into the black side? Where does it fall? So even in the Vinaya, actually, the monastic code, it's extremely well laid out, and it's still applicable even today, even after 2,500 years of time has passed. This Vinaya, this monastic code, we can still apply it today. But the thing is that sometimes, even with this application of this code, there's gray areas. There's areas where we don't 100% know, and we have this kind of rule. and we have to follow the rule, but we don't 100% know if it's gray, white, or black. Some cases are very clear, other ones are gray. So remember when I was a young monk, I first coming into the monastery as a postulant, or when I first encountered Buddhism. And there was all these times when I wanted to keep the precepts, and I would become very worried, kind of very, very concerned that I'd broken them, and kind of cause a lot of doubt and uncertainty. And uncertainty causes the mind to be very, very restless. It's kind of, don't know if I've broken this, don't know if I haven't broken this. And this is where there's this kind of meeting between these two poles, this pole where one has to use one's intellectual brain, and this pole where one has to use one sense of intuition, one sense of the actual situation at hand. And both of these things feed into each other. So actually, the general standard that one's good for one to use is beyond a reasonable doubt. So now just being here in Sri Lanka, of course, coming to a country where it's new, where don't know the system very well, where this is my first time ever being involved in something like this for myself, or for that I'll be the primary inhabitant of, for a time period, then there's a lot of uncertainty. It's kind of, is this a right rule? Is that a not right rule? And there's a learning curve to that. And it's kind of where one has to kind of investigate thoroughly and see thoroughly, is this something that's appropriate or allowable? Is this something that's not appropriate or allowable? Especially with something that's so important like one of these parajika rules. But almost certainly there's going to come a time if we'll see, if the gentleman says, yes, you can build the kuti, there's going to come a time when it's not 100% certain who has the authority. Is the authority been totally given? Is there a gray area here? What's the law actually say? What's the exact connotations of the law? I remember going through the forest laws in Sri Lanka when I first came here, and they're very strictly written. You can't even take like a stick or like water from the forest. But then in the forest there are people living there, and there's kuti. So eventually came to realize that there's this kind of play. There's this kind of gray area where there's a bit of play, that people here, having grown up here, understand. But as somebody coming from another culture, I have to learn about it. I've got to learn about these things. So the standard that one generally takes for these kind of rules that one either sets for oneself, or that, most importantly, that are set by the Buddha, if one is trying to keep the 5 precepts or the 8 precepts, is to try to keep them to know beyond a reasonable doubt, beyond a doubt that's reasonable. So, if, for example, one is trying to keep the 8 precepts as a lay person, and noon is coming up, one knows that one shouldn't eat after noon, and it's 11 o'clock. But one isn't 100% sure if solar noon, the time when the sun's in the middle of the sky, is now at 11:45 or 12:15 or 11:30. But reasonably, there's a reasonable doubt, beyond a reasonable doubt, it's not at 11:20 from all the different times one has looked. So in this case, one could continue eating up to 11:20, but past 11:20, one will want to be careful. This becomes perhaps even more important for goals, or this becomes it can come into play even more for goals and rules that one sets for oneself. And spreading out from these precepts, spreading out from these rules that the Buddha lays down for us. There's all these things in the Dhamma, there's all these things in the Vinaya. When we go out to practice these things, then we have to set limits for ourselves. So I was just thinking about one today, kind of these days, monks, we have phones, and there's all these different ways to communicate. There's kind of WhatsApp and, email and all these different things. And they weren't around at the time of the Buddha. So the question is, what line do we draw here? What line do we draw in the sand? And where is the line reasonable? Where is it unreasonable? So usually these days I like to not check my messages on WhatsApp or anything. I only like to check them once a day, usually this kind of particular time of the day. But then if there's an emergency, maybe go ahead. So where is the line for that? Where's the dividing line in this area between this goal that one has set, where it's black and white, and it's kind of, okay, should I just check my messages now at 3 p.m. Nobody's messaged me and there's no emergency. And to kind of maybe somebody sends you a message, you see a preview, you don't know, is this kind of crossing the line or not? So these are areas where the intuitive faculty tends to meet with this rational faculty. But in all of these things, when one sets these things and applies them, it's good if one has this standard of being a little bit, maybe a little bit more on the strict side, a little bit more on the side of not just jumping in to whatever's easy. And it's kind of, one can be too strict and become paranoid. One can be too strict and become worried. But if one becomes too loose, then the greater danger is that one just falls away from one's practices. One can fall away from one's precepts, or one can fall away from the goals that one has set. So in this case, with this kuti building, with going to visit these various people, we'll see what happens over the coming days or the next week or so. But still we'll probably try to be quite careful until it reaches a certain point when, okay, maybe this is good enough. We've gotten reasonably, it's beyond a reasonable doubt. We've talked to the people almost as high as we can go, and everybody seems okay. We can build it or not. And practicing in this way, practicing so that one, when one sets one's goals or one is following one's precepts, one keeps them to a level where they're beyond a reasonable doubt. Where even if there's still some doubt, one has to check, is this doubt reasonable? This is a way that one can maintain one's integrity and maintain the boundaries properly that one has set for oneself without falling into being too slack, without falling into being too easy, so that the rules, the regulations, the standards one has set for oneself can be protected, but used for their best purpose, which is to help one move forward in the Dhamma and Vinaya. Okay, so leave that for reflection, and wishing all the blessings of Dhamma practice.